Hello, everybody, and today we're going to be reacting to a crime case that happened 12 back in 2008, and I'm going to be breaking down the context of the crime. My name is Franco Sanchez, and this is the Final Boss Files. So let's dive right in.
So barbaric that they landed him a place on the FBI's most wanted list. And this video explores the dark depths of his actions and what followed. Chasing the American dream, his concerning behaviour began almost as soon as he landed in the United States. But as time passed by and his attitude remained unchecked, his arrogance would lead to some truly haunting actions, spanning far beyond murder. In the aftermath, Yasser found himself as a fugitive on the run, with members of his family supporting him behind the scenes. But what did Yasser Abdel Said do to get here? How long did he remain hidden for, and how did he do it? Religion is a very personal decision to make. Howdy folks, and welcome back to the Lone Star State, better known as Texas. It's the home of cowboys, Tex-Mex, and delightful southern hospitality. And with nearly 30 million people calling this place home, there is plenty of history to dive into. When thinking about the city of Dallas, sports enthusiasts amongst us will think of
Yeah, a lot of people instantly think of the Astrodome in Houston that has withheld a lot of events, a lot of sporting events, a lot of also wrestling events like WrestleMania. That's also been hosted too.
It also plays host to Houston's mission control for NASA. The phrase, "Houston, we have a problem," was immortalized during the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission, but
Yep,
almost all other launches,
that
successful or
happened.
otherwise, have taken off from Texas. For our story today, we're homing in on Irving, found in Dallas County. With the city boasting a current population of just under 250,000 people, it was once called home by the Dallas Cowboys until their former stadium was torn down in 2011. Irving remains a popular place for newly established immigrants, and sports a community more diverse than the rest of the state.
Yep, Texas has a lot of sports teams. They have the Dallas Cowboys, which are infamous for winning a lot of Super Bowls. I don't know how many. I might have to look up later after this. No, they're known for the Houston Rockets. They got a lot of sports teams.
It is currently one of the fastest growing cities, and also generates a very healthy economy. And one of those families living in the suburbs of Irving were the Saids. Beginning with the main character of our case today, Yasser Abdel Said was born on January 27, 1957, in Sinai, Egypt. He was born into a relatively affluent family alongside two older brothers, and despite living a fairly happy and successful life in Egypt, his parents eventually divorced. When his father remarried, it turned out that Yasser and his siblings would be left without any financial support. Thus, they were forced to make their own way in life. After
Okay, basically, there isn't much backstory to Yasser, but already it feels like the stuff he went through was pretty rough already as a child, but that doesn't excuse him of any of the crimes he's going to do later on. So we'll just have to wait and see how things go.
watching his two brothers emigrate to America and forge successful lives for themselves, Yasser decided to follow in their footsteps. And although he had originally moved to America on a student visa, this was dangerously close to expiring by the start of 1987.
Yeah.
Around this time frame, Yasser and his brothers were all approaching their 30s, and it's here that the first of many shocking details began to emerge. One of his brothers tried to date a 15-year-old named Patricia Owens, and when she rejected his advances, Yasser
So this is like where things start to get pretty horrible with Yasser. I mean, this already stems from his family. And like to him, I guess maybe he didn't see it as like something that was horrible. He thought it was something that was like normal in his because his family members did it. Because one of his brothers did it, he probably thought it was normal. And he had no problem doing that.
tried to win her over instead. Rather concerningly, this led to a relationship between the two, and only 1 week after dating Patricia, Yasser then proposed to her. Honestly, there are so many red flags here already. Despite the alarming age differences, due to Texas law, the marriage was actually permitted.
Yeah, like I I kind of see why on Yasser's part. I'm not on Yasser's family. They probably thought that was okay. I think that's probably something that happens in Egypt. I'm not sure, but how would Patricia's parents just let that happen? You know, even though it's legal, there's still a huge age difference. You know, the parents should have taken that into question, but
All they needed was written consent from Patricia's parents, which they seemingly provided. And although there did seem to be some caution from Patricia's family, they were genuinely confident that Yasser was a good match for her. I'm really trying to wrap my head around this.
Okay, great. Wait, were you even listening? You haven't taken a single note.
I'll say I'm also trying to wrap my head around that too. How were Patricia's parents just okay with that? And this is like the first of many mistakes which would lead to the crimes committed by Yasser.
Following a brief period of discussion, the two eventually married in a Christian church in February 1987. Now, Yasser was determined to begin building a family together, and so by the time Patricia turned 18 years old, she already had 3 children with him. The eldest child, her son Islam, with his 2 younger daughters Sarah and Amina. Yasser was not a particularly academically qualified individual, and he mainly created income for his family by providing taxi services. Having said that though, his dedication seemed to vary over the years, and there seemed to be various problems with his employers. While
Yeah, like apparently a lot of times his employers would fire him because of unusual behavior he had. He had a lot of behavioral issues, and who and later on in this story, you're gonna see how those behavioral issues he would kind of take out on his family, and especially his daughters would suffer the worst of it.
most of his companies in his local area would eventually decline to even lease a taxi to him, his final employer seemed to speak quite highly of Yasser. Colleagues described him as crazy and unpredictable, and even though
Yep, that basically checks out.
supportive of him, didn't have many good things to say either. He was quite fearless, unafraid to work in the more turbulent downtown area and deal with the violent drunks.
Now, when we're talking about somebody who's calm in a violent area and feels like there's no problem at all, and they could take care of themselves, that means one of two things. A, they can handle themselves and they might have experience with it, you know, over their lifetime. Or two, they're just a person who is probably not right in the head.
And by this point, he was known to always carry a gun on him while he worked. You can likely guess for yourself already, but Yasser was not a good man. And surprise, surprise, it didn't take long for issues to appear within the family. Given that Patricia had married him at the incredibly tender age of 15, it could
Keep in mind, this is 15, not even 18. This is 15.
be argued that it was already too late. Sadly, this poor young woman was already trapped.
Oh, yeah, it was. It definitely was.
And over time, Yasser began to show his true colours as a bitter man. Feeling inferior to his more successful brothers, he began to work overtime in order to bring more money into the household. Yet, from Patricia's perspective, she felt that he never earned enough to keep them in a good position. The eldest son, named Islam, was clearly favoured above the rest of Yasser.
Now, this is an issue that happens in a lot of families where there's like multiple children. It happens where like there's always going to be a favorite. There's always going to be a favorite child within these one of these stances. But the important thing is to not make it obvious. And clearly, Yasser did not care about that. He just made Islam a favorite. And I think this was a way that Islam would later get manipulated by his father and to do all of his bidding that he could.
family. He was allowed to address his mother by her first name and was also treated with blatant favoritism. And by all accounts, Yasser himself and Islam were self-appointed as higher ranking than his wife and daughters.
You see, that right there is already teaching, that right there, Yasser is already teaching his son Islam to disrespect his sisters and his own mother. So this kind of already shows what path Islam is most likely going to take.
According to his family, Yasser was endlessly paranoid and was always worrying that people were out to get him. These unfounded beliefs resulted in him taking control in the only place where he truly felt that he had authority. That, of course, sadly being within his own home. The results of this dissatisfaction and unfounded worry would prove catastrophic for the women within his family unit. It wasn't long
Yeah, just he was just a ticking time bomb at that point.
until a toxic pattern began to emerge. A pattern which saw Patricia reaching the end of her tether. And in 1997, out of desperation, she abruptly moved out with the children. However, she was sadly unable
It was a good move there to move out with her children, but unfortunately, she would move back in with Yasser. After seeing all the signs, she still moved back in with him.
to stay away, and by March of 1998 they had reunited, with Patricia agreeing to move back in with him in a different house found in Covington near Hillsborough. Sadly, the financial situation didn't improve. Yasser began to work at a local store, and the family existed in near squalor. It was by the end of 1998 that Patricia left with the children once again, this time with Child Protective Services getting involved.
Yeah, and when protective services get involved, that's when you know things are serious. And the problem is that Patricia failed to protect her own children. She failed at every level. She failed to stand up to Yasser. She failed to do anything about what he was doing. She failed completely. And and I think this was the second and probably the last time she does this. I might be wrong because this later video later continues onward, but we're gonna see.
And sadly, this was for a very troubling reason. In recent months, both daughters had confided in their grandmother that they were being abused by their father, Yasser, in the worst possible of ways. Obviously, the news devastated her. Police statements were taken and reports were made. Yet, despite the diabolical claims, Patricia was already faltering in her decision to leave Yasser. Despite the charges being laid against him, the two young girls eventually withdrew their statements, and even
I'm guessing the father threatened them. That's what I'm guessing. Either the father or the mother was trying to convince them to withdraw the charges because she was still considering going back to Yasser. Again, again, she definitely failed on her part.
said that they had lied about the abuse. Personally, I find this very hard to believe. I think that both daughters probably faced intense pressure or even threats to retract their claims against their father. But by the beginning of the following year, Yasser no longer had any pending charges against him. And just like that, Patricia returned with open arms and the children in tow. Shortly after this, another
Horrible mistake right
the
there.
disturbing behavior in Yasser had become noticeable. He had begun to obsessively monitor his wife and daughters both in and out of the house.
Here's the thing. Yasser didn't love anyone. He loved the idea of control. He loved having control over people, especially his daughters and his wife. And believe it or not, he also liked having control of his son because he was making sure that his son followed in his footsteps. He didn't love a single person. He loved control. That's all he loved.
Shortly after, they began to work at a convenience store. It's here that he began to stalk them outside in his car, keeping a watchful eye on what they were doing and even getting angry when they smiled at strangers.
I understand that in some way a parent wants to protect their kids, but obsessively filming them and recording them is definitely going overboard or overprotecting. And in Yasser's case, this was to make sure they were under his spell. My way of saying it.
She can see us from inside, right?
Oh,
Huh? She smiled to the customer.
I don't see the problem with smiling to another person, and the fact that you're gonna get mad over that. That's just stupid.
Now, I get it. Every responsible father worries about his children growing up, especially a daughter who is just about to find
Exactly.
her independence.
Exactly.
But the way that Yasser was acting and behaving here was outright unhinged. It is
Yeah.
worth mentioning here, by the way, that Patricia was actually with Yasser for all of these excursions, and with her passive reactions,
This is what happens when you don't have guts to like actually stand up to a partner that's like that, you know. The thing is, I do have a saying. The saying is, it's better to be single than to be into into a relationship when you feel that you're trapped. So
she was basically enabling his behavior. Without his wife challenging him and, frankly, his disgusting behavior, this sort of spying continued both inside and outside of the home. And, unfortunately, this extended way past basic surveillance. Amina and Sarah became too scared to even take phone calls by their friends, worried that their father would be listening in the background. He was always there, lurking, just waiting for them to slip up. In his mind, Yasser was becoming very unhappy with both Amina and Sarah. His daughters were becoming too westernized for his liking.
if you didn't want your daughters to be westernized, then why the fuck did you move to the United States? Why did you stay in the United States if you don't want them to become westernized? It's something I just won't understand from this narcissist.
And often associated with other American boys. Which literally just makes sense in my mind. You did decide to raise your
It does. It does.
family in America, mate. It was during this time of over-monitoring that Amina had fallen in love with a local boy named Joseph Marino. During the year of 2004, the two had met through taekwondo classes, and although their friendship blossomed into teenage romance, they had to be very careful with Yasser around. The lovers learned to regulate and censor their text messages to prevent him from getting angry, and it was generally understood that Amina's father was always listening and watching. Amina began to write personal emails and poetry during this time, detailing just how unhappy she was with her life at home. She had grown to be
Unfortunately, in cases like this, I think she had to like find some way or like a way out, I guess. And her dating that guy was kind of her escape from the reality that she was living from the control of her father. So it's sad. And I feel like she would have also came forward to the police, but she was under so much threat from her father, and especially the mother who is enabling this type of behavior.
increasingly fearful of her father, with one email sent to her history teacher spelling out this quite bluntly. That email reading, "He will without any drama or doubt kill us." Found in one of her private writing books, Amina wrote the following poem. "My heart, an open wound, I can only cry. Don't try to understand, make me a bird, let me fly. I hate you, I hate your land, you've frozen my heart, let me die. Make me an angel, let me fly. Endless tyranny, round and round, let me go.
That is a cry for help.
Where can I be found? My pain you will never know. Make me a leaf, let me fly, let me blow. You hang on, you think you want me, you don't want to know. You don't know me, and here I don't want to be." Speaking of warning signs and red flags, classmates often asked about the various marks and bruises left on both of the girls' arms. All in the meanwhile, the pair made no secret of the fact that they were from their father, and yet still, shockingly, nothing was done about this.
Yeah, unfortunately, they
In
were
typical
still
teenage
under that threat. They felt like if they spoke out, things would have gotten worse, but
fashion, Amina and Joseph had
it was actually the opposite. You know.
plans to run away and get married. This was despite the mutual understanding that they would always be in danger from Yasser and his so-called contacts in the underworld. Aside from the intense surveillance in and out of the home, Yasser also started refusing to work unless the girls were either asleep or being watched and monitored by their brother Islam. In very stark contrast, he had full trust in his son and none in his daughters. I find this part crazy, but he even tampered with Amina's car, replacing the airbag, you know, that famously critical safety feature.
Yeah, that just puts your daughters at more risk. And you know, it's pretty messed up to put a camera in there and swap it out from what an airbag would do. But
With a recording device so he could monitor everything that was being said. This was typical behavior of Yasser, by the way. Not only was he controlling enough to remove any and all privacy from his daughters, but he was also reckless and stupid enough to remove their safety too. Unbeknownst to Amina at the time, but her father had already chosen a husband for her in Egypt. And although this is typical for an arranged marriage, this is not something that westernized young women are used to. No surprise, but she rejected the proposal outright, which did nothing but further frustrate her father. You see, Yasser would have received a sizable dowry from the groom, a payment from the family for her hand in marriage, and he was planning on using the money to better finance himself for the next several years.
see, he never loved his daughters. He never loved anybody. He was doing it all for himself. All right. To like his love for Islam, it he frames it that way, but in reality, he's just making sure Islam becomes the same person he would.
Her objections meant that this financial arrangement had essentially vanished right in front of Yasser's face, and he rather viciously claimed that she had brought disgrace to the family, at least in his mind anyway. Outraged by her decision, Yasser began to look through Amina's phone bills in an effort to try and find out what she was hiding, or who.
Yeah, like you can tell the father was just obsessive that Yasser, like he was a complete narcissist here.
She was involved with. And his behaviour took a newfound low on Christmas of 2007, when he even threatened her with his firearm, thus leading to the wife and daughters fleeing the house once again. Alongside Amina.
Okay, so yeah, this is the third time they do this, and right here is where like Sarah and Amina like should realize that their mother is not gonna do anything to help them. Their mother is basically just a sheep following what Yasser is doing, and you know. But Patricia should also be at fault for doing this too. She's the mother. She should have done something as well. And going back with Yasser those two times was already a sign that she wasn't really looking out for her children as she should.
And Sarah's boyfriends, they fled Texas to stay with their aunt in Kansas, and afterwards found accommodation in Tulsa. What the
I mean, that was smart what they did at first. Go to Kansas.
girls really needed here was a strong mother who desperately cared about their safety.
But that never happened. We never got that. We never got that from what happens later on.
But sadly, Patricia once again began to have doubts about leaving the family home. By New Year's Eve, Patricia tried to drag her daughters back to Texas. Sarah reluctantly agreed to temporarily head back, but Amina, she refused. However,
Yeah, but like you see again, the third and final time. This is like the final chance Amina and Sarah had to save themselves. Amina already went back. I'm not sure. Was it Amina or was Sarah? Amina already went back, but Sarah. Oh wait, Sarah already went back, but Amina refused refused for a while. And during that time she refused, she should have been thinking what her mother was thinking at this point is she should have also thought more about the outcome of how basically her life inside the house was like a prison that she could never escape. And so I think that Amina should have like probably stayed where she was and called the police and filed some reports on that as well. The sad thing about this is the odds were always stacked against the two daughters. It was always going to be stacked against the two daughters because again, Yasser had the son manipulated. Uh, he had Patricia by her neck basically in a metaphorical way because
After
Patricia
heavy
couldn't stand up for herself. She was completely spineless. Patricia failed in every degree.
persuasion, she was eventually convinced to take the journey back home, and
And that was her fatal mistake. That was the fatal mistake. The one last opportunity to be saved. And that was a huge mistake.
tragically, this would be the last time that her boyfriend Joseph ever saw her alive. Her last words to him were, "You failed us." January the 1st, 2008. It was on New Year's Day that Yasser took both of his daughters out in his taxi. It seemed that he was offering peace, because he claimed that they were going out for a drive to get some food and talk things
Peace, my ass. He was not going to offer peace.
out. However, what would actually happen would be far, far more brutal. It was during this drive that, at 7:35 p.m., a harrowing phone call was made to the Irvine Police Department.
What's going on, ma'am?
I'm dying, that's what's up.
Irving Fire Department. Ma'am, are you still there? Ma'am, are you still there?
The worst part about it is that they're in a taxi cab because Yasser thought about this. The fact that they were in a taxi cab is probably the reason why it was harder for the police to actually trace where the phone was coming from. If they were at a specific location, like a house or a store, it would be easier for the police to track them down. I'm not sure how it works, but I would be interested to know furthermore how it would work.
All I got is she's telling me she's dying. I've got a, why are you still there, ma'am? Ma'am, what is your address? Ma'am.
Despite the clearly urgent and violent nature of the phone call, the caller was put on hold multiple times, and the authorities failed to ascertain an address or location right away. By the time the authorities had found the taxi, both girls had sadly passed away from their injuries.
Yep, it was already too late for them at that point.
Amina had been shot twice, and Sarah a total of 9 times. And as for their father, Yasser Saeed was nowhere to be seen. The story of Amina's and Sarah's deaths dominated local and national headlines alike, and this was for two very obvious
There could have been other people who stepped in outside who saw the bruises on them. Who could have said something, oh, like they could have called the police too. It's just that like a lot of people are basically bystanders and they don't know if they're the right person indicated to step in. And that happens a lot. Like somebody who has to be like in the right mind that things are actually going on has to step in. Unfortunately, this didn't happen. And since the two daughters were too scared to say anything to the police or do anything about it, it unfortunately led to this moment.
reasons. Not only had two young girls come to such a tragic end, but the primary suspect, being their very own father, was now on the run. Although many
Yep, he was vanished. He vanished without a trace. And what's crazier to think about it is that he would be able to hide out for 12 years um, from the FBI. And what's crazier is that he doesn't even go far, which is saying something.
Many speculated that this was a so-called honor killing. The authorities would not publicly name it to be one quite yet. However, slowly, more and more began to believe it after the family's personal lives began to leak to the public's attention. No religion advocates honor killings. However, there are extreme cases where people will commit murder with the excuse of it in a desperate attempt to justify their own actions. This
Yep, and this is something that Yasser would definitely do. Just by his own actions earlier on, Yeah, it looks like something he would do.
Was apparently the motivation given for Yasser's unspeakable crime. He believed that he had been driven
Of course it was.
to kill both of his daughters to restore his family's honor, when, to be honest, in reality, he was just an aggressive piece of shit father. Following the murder of her daughters and the disappearance of her husband, Patricia seemed to be more concerned about Yasser's identity, and rather than grieve
Oh, now, okay, now she's concerned. Now when her daughters are missing, now when they're dead, now she's concerned, right? But everything before that, right? You did nothing about it. She did nothing about it. Everything before that, this could have all been avoided if she had done something before, or in case never married him from the beginning. But she's 15 at the time, but now she's like a grown woman at this point. She can have her own say in this. She could have had her own say in this. She could have done something about this. They could have never came back to Yasser. They could have. She could have cut off all contact with Yasser as well. But
for the loss of
this
Sarah
is
and
what
Amina,
happens.
she made every effort to remove Yasser's association with the crime. As time passed by,
This is what pisses me off the most, is that afterwards she defends Yasser.
emotions heightened, and both families and everyone around them seemed to be split down the middle. Patricia and Yasser's family were convinced by his innocence, whereas everyone else was adamant that
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the worst part of it. That Yasser's family, are just blindly defending him as well too. After knowing what kind of piece of shit he is, they're still defending him.
he was to blame. This even extended to their funeral, where Islam shouted at one of Amina's ex-boyfriends, demanding that he leave. He further blamed him for their deaths, and even began a fight with him, in a move that
What the fuck did the boyfriend do? He didn't do any of this. He just had contact with them. Apparently, Islam basically took all of the traits of his father.
angered many friends and almost all of Patricia's family. Amina and Sarah were laid to rest at a Muslim cemetery, which, to this day, still remains to be a poorly kept gravesite. Both women were not actually practicing Muslims. In fact, Yasser himself had rarely gone to a mosque or displayed any person.
Look at here, the guy who praises religion, who praises being Muslim, is like the least acting Muslim of them all. He was also a hypocrite too. So.
Personal faith. However, Patricia, on the other hand, felt it was the appropriate place. Another poor
The appropriate place? If your daughters weren't even Muslim, why wouldn't they go? Why would they be buried in a poor gravesite that is barely even kept in shape?
decision on a already long list of bad acts of devotion toward Yasser.
Dad, just turn yourself in, and if you do, I'll get you a lawyer to help you out. Maybe they won't put you on death row, but you can sit in prison and think about what you've done.
He's also a piece of shit. Islam's also a piece of shit.
In the immediate aftermath, Yasser seemed to disappear into thin air, and despite friends and family being interviewed by the police, no one came forward with any information or evidence. What is rather strange,
Because people who knew him were hiding him. They were hiding him. They were helping him. Unfortunately.
is that Yasser managed to fire a total of 11 shots in a very busy part of Irvine without being noticed during or even after, which makes it almost impossible.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that because he was also on the highway with them. I think by the pictures he's shown, he was also on the highway with them. So, but like after I see the car, I noticed that they were on a street somewhere. Could have been a busy street, maybe.
Possible to evade without any sort of help or support. And although he may have had a pair of clean clothes on him, he likely needed someone to pick him up, considering his daughters were dead inside his own vehicle. But without any information on his whereabouts, the case eventually went cold, and the FBI had to consider that perhaps he had fled the country back to Egypt. With this in mind, Yasser Abdel Said was officially placed on the FBI's most wanted list, where he would remain for several more years.
12 years in total. Yeah.
Trust me, many people wanted him caught, or even worse.
You, just you, building your app on base 44.
Despite this, nobody actually knew what happened to Yasser. It was speculated that his brother Yassine picked him up near the crime scene. However, with no evidence, no charges were ever pressed. Yasser's son travelled to Egypt shortly after the murders, where he then descended into an angered frenzy. The deluded man sent dozens of derogatory emails to Patricia's family during this time frame.
So this is becoming a problem. This is probably a chain of events that has been happening since probably Yasser's whole bloodline. And you see, because Yasser basically favored his son Islam heavily. Remember earlier he said that Islam was allowed to call his mother by her first name. He was able to call his daughters by anything. He was able to monitor his sisters whenever he wanted. You know, Islam basically took off right where his father left off. He started committing all of Yasser's poor choices. It was almost unavoidable at this point. So
Always reiterating the same overall message, that his sisters died because of their own behaviour. Although Islam's visit back
their own behavior. It was not their own behavior. It was your father's behavior, but you know, he goes and defends his father because that's what he thinks is right.
to Egypt increased the speculation that Yasser had fled the country, it turns out that he was actually a lot closer than they had thought. The truth is, Yasser never even left Texas. He was actually staying in an apartment owned by his brothers, and for 9 years, even after he was put on the FBI's
There we go. His family was helping him. His brothers were helping him. Despite him being clearly guilty, they're still helping him.
most wanted list.
And you want to know why? Because the brothers did that same route, took that same route. I think earlier when he mentioned one of the brothers was dating a woman that was younger than 18. Yes, Yasser basically took down the same
He
path
lived
as them.
undetected and without raising any suspicion whatsoever. Now, this is completely ridiculous if you ask me. The properties must have somehow been connected to Yasser's brothers' names in one way or another, and it seems entirely absurd that the FBI were not able to follow some sort of paper trail here. Anyway, it was in August of 2017.
Yeah, it's a little strange because the FBI usually first goes and visits a criminal's family immediately when a crime happens. So
That a maintenance worker was carrying out repairs on an air conditioning unit within the same block of apartments. It was in that moment that, with the help of the FBI's most wanted list, that he spotted a man that looked like Yasser. He immediately reported the sightings to the authorities, but by the time that the search warrant was issued, Yasser
they couldn't find him. They couldn't find him. The brothers already, nope. One of his brothers probably already noticed that the repairman was about to call the police or something. That's probably why they were able to move Yasser to a different location.
had conveniently vanished. However, what agents did find left behind was rather interesting. Directly under the balcony of the second floor apartment lay a bush, and inside that bush, agents found a pair of glasses and dozens of cigarette butts. Now, although Islam had connections to the apartment, he was known to not be a smoker, but his father certainly was. Forensic agents were able to demonstrate a novel technique known as kinship DNA analysis, and through this method, they were able to prove that these glasses did in fact belong to Yasser. After 9 long years of being on the run, they finally had proof that he was still in the country. Now, Yasser's case remained relatively quiet after this, but
Yeah, but because of like the cigarette buzz, it was going to be easier to catch him.
3 years later, in 2020, one final and crucial breakthrough would occur. Various reports had come through to authorities to suggest that maybe he was holed up in a small house in Justin, Texas. And although they were not entirely sure, various local reports had suggested their sightings to special agents. The house was in a rural and isolated part of Justin, and if Yasser really was in there, he was well hidden from any prying eyes. After setting up a surveillance team around the property, agents eventually noticed Islam and Yassine entered the house with food, before
See? What did I tell you? His brothers, right? And his son was also helping him stay hidden from the police so that he wouldn't get caught. Islam is Islam definitely took the same path of his father. He took the same path of his father. He was manipulated since he was a child. I'll say that he was manipulated since he was young. But later on, when like you get older, you can either choose to believe what the same manipulative parent has said, or you could try testing the boundaries and challenge what he's been saying. So,
eventually leaving with bin bags. And then, later on that night, they saw the shadow of a third man moving around the inside of the house. The discovery stirred enough suspicion to execute a warrant, and FBI agents prepared to raid the property. And on August the 26th, 2020, they stormed in to finally find Yasser hiding inside. At long last, after more than 12 years on the run, he had finally been found. The man was arrested immediately, with Islam and
good. Islam should go to prison too.
Hussein arrested shortly afterwards. The story made national headlines for a second time, but now people were not just reminded of Yasser's monstrous actions against his daughters, but also that an FBI's most wanted fugitive had finally been caught. And therefore, when his trial began 2 years later in August of 2022, there was no shortage of public interest. Now, despite Texas being a state that could technically enforce it, the death penalty was not sought for Yasser. His defense tried to claim he was innocent, claiming that society had, quote, been rooted in post-9/11 Islamophobia.
Probably the dumbest legal defense I have ever heard. What kind of pains me about this is that Patricia wasn't locked up at all, because like she definitely was enabling all of Yasser's behavior and didn't stop him at all. At all. She failed to protect her daughters. She failed to do anything about the situation. She failed to cut off Yasser, which is what she should have done. Patricia should also be in prison, by my standards. Unfortunately, I guess in the state of Texas, she didn't commit any crime.
Members
But
of the
still, she's just as bad as Yasser.
family would even deny it was an honor killing, claiming that if he had murdered his daughters, it was simply because he had snapped in the moment. But still, Yasser claimed that he was innocent. Apparently, he had the feeling that after leaving the taxi, someone was watching him and his daughters where they parked. Saying that, he gave no real good reason as to why he left the taxi, or why he even ran away, and then remained at large for more than 12 years after. Sarah's frantic 911 call, which was recorded after being shot 9 times, was questioned by the defense. They argued that she probably would have been confused and incoherent due to her injuries. But this did little in the face of the audio transcript, where she clearly stated that her dad had shot
Yeah, it's clear that Yasser shot her.
During his trial, Patricia confessed that Yasser had been abusive both to herself and to his daughters prior to the killing, even recalling a time when he had threatened them with a gun. Addressing Yasser in court, his sister-in-law, Connie McGeough, summed up the situation as best as could be expected. "There is no honor in killing 2 unarmed people. I call that being a coward. The only thing that you did to your family was stain it with your own family's blood. And now it is your turn to get what you have given. A prison that you call home." After only 3 hours of deliberation, Yasser Saeed was found guilty of capital murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and was incarcerated.
Yep.
incarcerated at the McDonnell Unit in Texas Department of Criminal Justice, where he remains to this day and will die behind bars. In January of 2021, Islam Yasser Abdel Saeed
How
pleaded
much did he
guilty to
get?
harboring a fugitive, conspiring to harbor a fugitive, and
Yeah.
one count
If
of conspiracy
he did harbor a fugitive, he also blatantly harassed Patricia's family, I think.
to obstruct justice. He was therefore sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. In February 2021, Yasser's brother Yassine was found guilty of conspiracy and harboring a fugitive, therefore being sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Both Islam and Yassine are serving their time together in the Federal Correction Institution of Bastrop. Thinking about it, it is actually quite impressive to remain hidden for so long in such close proximity. To be
Yeah.
on the FBI's most wanted list for a total of 12 years and remain at large is no small achievement, especially for the standards of someone like Yasser. Yasser's crimes make this one even more unusual.
Yeah.
To murder both of your daughters is absolutely despicable, but what makes this strange
Unfortunately, this has happened in a lot of these cases where there's murder between family members. And it's actually more common that it happens with somebody you know than a stranger that doesn't even know you. But I guess it's maybe because of piling reasons and stuff like that.
is how much his wife and his own son stood up for him. Patricia's behavior
Yeah, that too. Patricia too. That's why I said she should have also been locked up for enabling Yasser and not doing anything about what he was doing to his daughters. What he was doing to the daughters.
throughout this entire case is incredibly bizarre, though it does make you wonder, she was likely under his abusive spell for quite a long period of time.
Yes, that too. That's also good to take into account. She was under a spell since she was 15,
Now, obviously,
but still after a
religion
while,
was
that
a
doesn't
big
excuse
problem
her
in this
actions.
case, which is another strange side note actually, because Yasser didn't closely follow Islam.
Yeah, he was a hypocrite. He said he followed Islam, but he really didn't.
To add to this, he was even married in a Christian church. Which is kind of ironic when you think about it, because the man was so adamant on arranging a marriage for his own daughter back in Egypt. And despite allowing many Western traditions in his own family home, he decided this was an honor killing after they began to date Western boys.
Which again, right? You move your family to the US from Egypt. How do you not expect your children to become westernized? How do you not expect that?
Honestly, there are so many contradictions to his beliefs. On New Year's Day of 2008, Amina and Sarah lost their lives at the hands of their own father. Amina was only 19 years of age, and Sarah only 18. Barely even adults, they had their whole lives ahead of them, and were making moves towards creating lives.
Yeah, they were stuck in their own little prison, basically, that their own father created, and there was no way out. Their their brother was the same as their father, and and their mother did nothing to help. She saw the abuse happen and did nothing.
For themselves, lives away from their obsessive, abusive tyrant of a father. Before they could make it out alive, the family's volatile situation suffocated their ability to live, and eventually even cost
Yeah,
them their lives. Neither Sarah nor Amina behaved in a way that any of us would deem unsavory. They were hard-working, pleasant, and likable young women that simply had the severe misfortune to be born into a family where the odds were endlessly stacked against them.
it's
They
true.
suffered under an abusive and controlling.
There was no way out. It felt like there was no way out for them. There could have been a way out. That moment when they went to Kansas and and Amina stayed in Kansas for a little bit longer. That was the moment. That was probably, I think, her only window of opportunity out. And unfortunately, she was guilt tripped, probably by their mother, to go back.
Father, a man who spied on them, abused them, and tried to maintain his power over every aspect of their lives. They had a brother who was conditioned to understand that this was normal, and consequentially went along.
Yep.
with it. And although they may have had Patricia as the woman that gave birth to them,
Biologically, yes. But if we're talking about parental wise, how she was raising them, no. She wasn't really a mother at all. She cared more about Yasser, her partner, than her children, which kind of already explains that. Which kind of already explains that somebody's not a good parent there.
biology aside, she was not the mother they both so desperately
And she should also be locked up too, in my opinion.
needed her to be. Saying that, it is impossible to deny that she also suffered under Yasser's hand. And with a severely underaged marriage and 3 kids by the age of 18, she very clearly was another one of his victims, and the longest enduring one at that. The reality is, though, that she failed her daughters at almost every single turn, and every time that she fled the home with them, she always forced them to return. By the way, this was despite the countless offers of sanctuary from her own family. Even after their deaths, Patricia's behavior was, quite frankly, terrible. She hampered all efforts to find
Yeah, she deflected all responsibility. She deflected all wrongdoing. Even worse, defending Yasser as well. So,
Yasser and cared more about his image. And despite
uh-huh.
no charges being laid against her, almost every interview of her that I see displays her defending her ex-husband. To put
Yeah, I would have loved to see her go to prison, but unfortunately, you know, none of the laws in Texas were able to get her there. But
things short and blunt, she had every opportunity to save her daughters. I guess
she had so many opportunities. She had 3 big ones, and she messed up on all of them.
being complacent and apathetic to the situation was the path of least resistance for her. Amina and Sarah lost their lives at the hands of their father, and were failed at every turn by those who should have protected them the most. Their futures were
Especially Patricia.
stolen by adults that could barely be described as parents, and Yasser's extended family made that even worse. And all of this is nothing but the most severe of tragedies.
Okay, turn it off, Dad.
I'm not really sure
Yeah, this case was something that was horrible, but it was a great thing to watch, and it was great watching this video. So I hope you guys like and subscribe to Final Boss Files. And if you like this sort of content, I can continue doing this. Well, I'll continue doing the skits if you want me to do them. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.